There's always been this division in this understanding among behavioral scientists that, biology and genes had an impact on you when you were born, and then environment takes over after that. And through the years, this has been debated, and then, it's been nature versus nurture. And there's so many different ways that these processes are intertwined. And one way is through gene-environment correlations. So gene-environment correlations look at the degree to which people's environments and experiences are to some degree steered by their inheritance. And so there's different ways. I mean, for example, the family that I was raised in, or that you were raised in, the families that we were raised in, these families are not randomly assigned to us. I had my biological father and my biological mother, and the environment that I was raised in was part of their extended phenotype. So people, when they're in their biological households, are already surrounded by a genetic influence. And then in addition to that, as we go across our lives, we select and modify our environments. And so this is basically, this is called a gene-environment correlation, an active gene-environment correlation. So active gene-environment correlations are when people select and modify their environments, and, like, for example, their peer group. So inside any school, there's a wide variety of kids. But based upon your temperament, you may want to hang out with different kids, and they may want to hang out with you differently. So I think it's important to realize that these aspects of the environment reflect a lot of your inheritance on an individual level.
Okay. So I mean, like, I can see the argument why they emphasize so much on the effect of genes as determining the variation in individuals. But I'm not sure. Maybe I missed if they discussed it. But so, for example, they say like it's the major features of human development that are programmed genetically. Um, but like my question is like, like I can see that they use genetics as the basis that account for those differences. But so like what areas or what are the features that are not necessarily accounted by genes, or because they do recognize that environment also has its effects in individual differences, but it's the main features of human development that are determined by genes. So like what would be not those main features, those individual differences accounted by environment, not necessarily by genes, or because they don't say like every difference, individual difference is determined by genes. They do still recognize the effect of environment.
Yeah, no, I get it, right? It's just where they say that it impacts all of these different things. But what are those actual aspects that they think is most heavily affected by the genomes, which I guess they don't really say specifically from what I was reading. So I think it's a good question, definitely. My assumption would be like that they're talking about like the ability, right, to learn language, right, fundamental IQ aspects, like things like temperament as well. I know that in lifespan development and in other research, it's found that, even in utero, like environmental effects can even that aren't like direct, like, fetal alcohol syndrome, like very physical, like drug addiction might have clear effects. But, even like environmental effects like stress and like surroundings, volume level, and like endure certain different periods seems to affect later behavior in infants, even right from starting in the uterus. I think around like 3 months or something is when I feel like I read that, but that could be wrong as well. But like that still has an effect, and that's something I always think about in these studies. They talk about like twin studies, identical twin studies. Is it's still not a true measure of environmental effect versus genetics, because twins are still always going to be, right, at least in the way that's normally done or how it's done now, are always raised in right in the same uterus, right, same person. And so like what is the actual effect of that could be larger than we think it is, or it could be a lot smaller than we think it is. I don't know if there's really a consensus on where that stands, but I do think it's like interesting to think about when thinking about these studies and how to interpret twin studies, in my opinion, at least.
I think this was where it comes in with the paper, the three kinds of genotype environment correlations, where they have the passive, evocative, and active kind. So like with the parents and like you were saying with the alcohol-fetal syndrome, that would be the passive kind where it's dependent on the parents. And like they were showing that it changes over time. Like as the child gets older, they switch to more of the active kind where they're going out and seeking their environment that's more conducive to their genotype. And that they were showing like earlier in development or the rearing of the child, the passive kind is more prevalent, and that's why you see the more of the similarity between twins. But as they get older, they start having the differences because of the active kind of correlation. But it doesn't really answer how much role does the environment play into it, or when does it take over. But
I don't know. To me, it's like, how do we study that though? And how do we interpret this research is a question for me. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that as well. But
the prenatal environment would load on shared environment. So SCAR doesn't really talk about this, but there's differences between shared environment and non-shared environment. And so assuming there's differences in this depending on whether they're in the same sac or not, which not all twins are, but if they're in the same sac, they're getting all of the same prenatal stuff. And even if they're in different sacs, the mom's still eating the same food and doing all the same things. So it's pretty similar. So that's where it would go. But yeah, it's a line, and we don't know a lot about like where that ends versus where like the home environment ends, because the same mom who had all that stress that she was giving the child prenatally is giving them a stressful home after they're born in most cases. So it is complicated. What Scar was talking about is this idea that like this stressed out mom gives the child these stressed out genes because probably part of that is genetic for her. And then she gives them this stressed out environment during which she's not taking care of them the way a non-stressed out mom would, or things like that. And Claudia's right. They're not responding to her stress directly. They're responding to how it affects them. So it's kind of indirect, but that's passive gene environment correlation.
What do you guys think of the other types of correlation?
Active was one of my first introductions to this topic. I know I had a developmental psych teacher in undergrad who just loved this idea, would talk about this paper all the time and how people shape their own environments, how they select information from their environments that's more relevant to their genetics, and that helps. And so that just kind of stuck with me. Evocative, your behavior evokes, or I don't know, maybe elicited would be a better term.
What do you guys think about the soundness of this theory?
yeah, we just kind of throw out the what if hypotheticals to like kind of challenge it. And I was just wondering, like, was any of those hypotheticals challenging enough to like counteract the theory?
I mean, there are people who don't like Scar, yeah, but I don't know. I mean, I'm so biased here that like I love this stuff. So I think it's correct, and we do have evidence showing it's correct. But I don't know of any specific like arguments against it. People argue with behavior genetics more than this specifically. So there's a lot of arguments against behavior genetics as a whole that I'm sure would encompass this, but I haven't seen too many. I hear more in classes that people don't like SCAR because on the face of it, it seems convoluted, but it's really not. So people attack behavior genetics more than they attack this, I would say, for a lot of the reasons that we were talking about, that we don't know how the prenatal environment fits into it, that twins are raised differently, and all of these things.
Does anyone have final thoughts on the paper itself?
I don't know. I thought it was pretty interesting to read about, like the genotype kind of guiding and directing the person towards environments. like I guess I had like some thoughts on that, but like reading this paper and like it trying to reinforce the idea that the genotypes influence us to seek out certain environments